Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. I'm your host, Harmony. I'm here with Russell Case.
Harmony. Unfortunately, we've received a letter from our legal department
Oh dear.
at the Finding Harmony podcast. I'll just read a few sections for you. The SEC has filed a complaint
Against you, of course.
against the both of us. So what they've found out, or what they've discovered through their analysis, is that 86 of our 138 episodes are likely fabrications and were produced by bots.
Bots?
Yeah. So we're gonna have to go through those, and we could either fight it, which I don't think we have the funds to do.
No.
But we could just take them down and delete them.
That sounds like a good side job for you.
We're gonna have to. So the sexual healing episode, for example, might very well have been a bot, is what they're saying.
A bot.
It was produced by bots.
Well, today is not produced by a bot, nor are any of us bots on this episode.
It is hard to tell, though, for you at home. I can understand.
And because our guest today is Michelle Khoury. Hello, Michelle. How are you?
Hello. So happy to be here.
It's so great to have you here. I'm really excited. You and I met in person over the internet the other day.
Which is the way to meet these days.
It is. It's true, right? I know. I keep thinking, how am I going to meet people if I never leave my house? So that is the way that I meet most people these days. And because we were both nominated as ambassadors of the year through Yoga Gives Back.
Yes, congratulations.
And congratulations
to the both of you. That's so cool. Wow.
Yeah, it was such an honor, and we just had such an amazing conversation. And I can't wait to share it with everyone during the Yoga Gives Back on November 12th.
I have blocked out that day. I think it's probably the one time I can actually say that I have nothing else going on, because I blocked it out so far in advance. So definitely tune in.
Yeah,
it's the day after the Black Panther release, Wakanda Forever. So that's how
that's
I know.
True.
That's on November 11th in theaters near you.
Yes. And it's also Remembrance Day.
Remembering. Okay.
The day after Remembrance Day.
That was a good one. The day after. I have an intro for Michelle, and I'd love to talk with you about all these different things that you're amazing at.
Oh, wow.
Michelle Khoury is a West Indian immigrant, wife, mother, and entrepreneur. Michelle led a rewarding 20-year career in the healthcare industry, holding several global and regional roles as part of cancer drug launches. She currently serves as the health and wellness educator with Integrative Health at Children's Health of Philadelphia. You hold a Bachelor's of Science in Pharmacy, a Master's of Science in Health Sciences and Clinical Research Administration, and a PhD in Public Health and Epidemiology. How do you have time for all of these things? That's incredible. That
was a long time ago, too.
It's an incredible career profile. Can you tell us more about your work at Children's Health? Do you want to? Would you like to?
Yeah, no, it's funny, I sort of switched lives, I guess. For the majority of my life, I was working in the pharmaceutical industry, and first practicing pharmacy, and then through one of my hospital jobs, I applied for a job at one of the bigger pharmas, and there you go. I got the job, and I thought, oh, this will be lovely. And I stayed there for 20 years, and not in the same company, but basically the same type of job. And now, as part of my work with my studio, YogaMazia, I ended up having an opportunity to also work from another perspective, the perspective of integrative health, and bringing yoga into health and wellness education at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So, when I'm not doing my work with YogaMazia and everything else,
Yeah.
I also share some of my time with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and we provide health and wellness education. It's really an equity program for families and children who may not necessarily be privy to that type of service or education in the area. So it's really good. It's a nice balance to some of the day to day that I do right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Incredible.
I was going to ask if you might know my friend Michelle Kelsey Mitchell, who is the founder of Yo Kids. She's out of Virginia, Arlington, Virginia.
I do not know her personally, but I do know the name.
Oh, cool.
We worked together for years and years and years over at Pure Edge, teaching kids yoga together. One of the things that you said that was really interesting is that we taught kids yoga, but very quickly we had to change that to health and wellness. We just found that it was easier to work in public space with that terminology. And I just wondered if you mentioned health and wellness, and I just wondered if that was intentional for you as well. Is that something that you've encountered?
So I've encountered it in both ways. I think from the perspective of YogaMazia and what I do and the work that I do with my own business, I still continue to use the word yoga. I think it's important that we continue to educate around the misperceptions that might be out there, because when you really think about it, the reason people might not use the terminology or the word as we know it is because they have a particular mindset about it, right? And probably that mindset is based on incorrect information or a lack of understanding of a particular aspect of yoga as a practice as a whole. But what in the way that I use it, to me, it's more as a whole. So it's not to replace yoga, and even my work within integrative health at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, the way they say it is also in the same instance. It's really truly integrating yoga with all of the other aspects that benefit our health and wellness. So whether that's, acupuncture or massage therapy or, our nutrition, healthy eating, getting enough sleep, getting, all of these lifestyle approaches are part of yoga technically, but I think it's just how you think about it and how you define it as well. In some cases, it's probably more comfortable for people to use a particular terminology over others. But, I sort of see yoga as one of the many other facets that we can come into and to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves, which is what yoga is, right? It is self-care.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I tend to use like yoga practice and self-care practices interchangeably. Just because I feel like it is such a part of our self-care practice, and self-care is maybe like a bigger umbrella that could include, mindfulness or meditation or how we're thinking,
Exactly.
like all kinds of things, journaling even, but all of that is also a part of the yoga
Absolutely.
path and practice as well.
I agree.
Yeah.
And so how do we even turn that around to explain it to children, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that's why, the approach that's taken is, okay, using terminology that might be a little bit easier to understand, which is absolutely okay. But, I think from the perspective of how I look at it, it's also making sure that we do not miss out on the opportunity to explain to our children exactly what that entails. And that includes yoga and what is yoga and how can it help you and all of the different facets related to it, not just the physical, which is what a lot of people think it is.
Have you been successful at all with your own kids? We're struggling.
To get him interested in yoga.
So if by kid you mean that includes my husband, then I absolutely failed when it comes to my husband. No, with my kids, actually, I think they are more the life force for me to keep going with this, to be quite honest with you. I started yoga when I was pregnant with my second child, my second daughter. And when I started yoga, I didn't think that it was something that people like me or who looked like me did.
Mhm.
So it was not even something that I considered, to be quite honest with you.
Mhm.
Right.
I happened to be with my husband and my daughter, my first daughter at the time. We went to a YMCA. And the YMCA is a very nice community setting where, you go in and they have all these classes, and we had this membership, and I wasn't using any part of the membership, but my husband, he definitely takes advantage of every single penny that's spent in our household. So he and my daughter, they started this karate class.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting in front, and there's like all this glass in the front and you can see them. So I'm pregnant, and I didn't have, I would say, a absolutely 100% pleasant experience with my first pregnancy. It was very different. Anything that you would have considered part of a normal quote unquote birth plan was completely the opposite, right? And
Mhm.
at the end, I was just happy that I had a healthy baby,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it's not, when you think about some of the mortality rates,
Yeah.
they're especially, from a maternal mortality, they're especially significantly higher in non-white
Yeah.
Yeah.
woman, right? And
Yeah.
so for me, I wanted to really think about strategically, how can I, even, from a health and wellness perspective, what can I do to just make this experience a little bit better?
Mhm.
So here I am contemplating on that particular question in the middle of this YMCA, looking at my husband and daughter doing karate through this glass. And I turn to my right, and there's a yoga class going on.
Mhm.
Huh.
And it's an Ashtanga yoga class. Now, of course,
Oh,
I didn't even
wow.
know what the word Ashtanga meant. I didn't know, what the
Yeah.
practice entailed or anything. And my husband's like, "Oh, you should try this." And I'm like there with, I mean, I wasn't extremely big at the time, but I was forming
Yeah.
a
Mhm.
nice little, punch. And I went to I remember walking in, and there are all these lovely, tall, skinny, really bendy women in there. I don't
Yeah.
remember seeing any men,
White
and,
women.
nobody looking like me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I was like, okay. And I did get the courage to go to the teacher, and I asked her, I was like, hey, I'm pregnant, is would this be a good class for me? And she looked at me, and I will never ever forget. She looked at me and she said, "Are you breathing?" And I'm like, well, I'm standing here, right? And she said, "Then you're already doing yoga." So she said, "You can
Ah.
absolutely, you do it to what you think it would mean for you." And she said, "You can come in. You don't have to, don't look at what anybody else is doing. You can follow along, and I can guide you along the way." And so that's what I did. I went to the dollar store, I think, the next day. I bought myself a mat, and I said, I'm going to try to maximize whatever I can from this membership that I was not using,
Yeah.
and started doing this class.
Do you
And she was
do you
so
remember her
helpful.
name?
Yes, her name is Shari Simon. She
Uh-huh.
actually owns an Ashtanga yoga studio in the area that I live in, Doylestown, Pennsylvania. It's called Sundog Yoga,
Oh,
and
Wow.
cool.
she's actually a student of David Swenson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so funny that when I moved to this area several years later,
Yeah.
I walked into her studio and took her class. And I thought, again, in my mind, that was kind of like my first Ashtanga class. Because again, other than doing it then,
Yeah.
I, practice yoga, etc., but not specifically Ashtanga. And I walked into this class and I thought, this seems so familiar. And I'm looking at
Yeah.
this face and I'm like, she seems so familiar. And I walked up
Wow.
to her after and I said, did you teach at the YMCA back in 2013? She was like, yeah, I don't do that anymore though. And did it like, oh my gosh, what are the chances
That's
that
wild.
like so to up to this day, I mean, I see her as like my teacher.
Yeah.
I'm not an Ashtangi, and
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
she's somebody that I call upon all the time. And it
Oh,
was she, that was a significant moment in even what I understood yoga to be.
mm.
Yeah.
I
She really
eventually,
she really
yeah,
hit you with both
absolutely.
barrels with that
Yeah.
question. I mean, that's a
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
very
imagine, right?
deep.
You're going into this class and you're seeing all the because it's a
Yeah.
Mhm.
sequence and they're going through. And I did
Yeah.
the poses. I mean, honestly, I surprised myself. I wasn't doing the ones that I'm not supposed to, and I eventually transitioned into a prenatal class. So she kind of paved the way for me. That's why I didn't
Yeah.
fall and I lost touch. I knew that she was this person. I knew that she had her studio and that was that. And I kind of we all went our separate lives
Yeah.
and that kind of paved the way.
That's so cool that it came full circle though, and you
It
like
was an
met back
extreme
up years
surprise.
later. Yeah.
And then when she found out that I was, opening the studio, like we were
Yeah.
talking to each other, but as we were doing this, she didn't know that it was me, as I was opening
Mm.
my
Oh, yeah.
studio. And so
Yeah.
that was just a whole different connection right there all over again. So it
Yeah.
was
Wow.
really
Oh,
nice.
that's so cool.
It's so interesting. I feel like I've had a difficult time coming around to the idea of privilege in a yoga space. I felt like very early I understood your white male privilege. My mom was very keen to make sure I understood that. But yoga for me in like 1993 was this punk, gnarly thing that artists and dishwashers did. It wasn't like a thing for the rich white girls until Madonna started doing it, and it was just the transformation was kind of bewildering. I think that was true for Harmony and I both. It was like nobody cool. Like we were losers. Like we're not. Like we weren't. Nobody.
Definitely like into some alternative things, I would
Yeah, it was a
say.
counterculture punk thing that you do. You go to a rainbow gathering and then you do some yoga. Not You're not going to downtown Beverly Hills and doing yoga. No one was doing that. It's so
If you even think about some of, as I was doing some history and you talk to different people and you read different things. I mean, even in the civil rights era, you know, there were really predominant African American
oh, absolutely.
leaders who did it.
Yes.
Quincy Jones,
Alice
you know,
Coltrane.
Rosa Parks.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
Yeah.
like
yeah.
when you look at it, it's just I guess it's one of those things where you're not really paying attention as much.
Mm-hmm.
Even in
Mhm.
the current world, as I was, back, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, when I did my first yoga teacher training, it wasn't something that I, focused on. It was more, and because I was doing it for me, I had just had at the time, my second daughter,
Mhm.
and then we
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
moved halfway around the world to Dubai in like
Oh,
a
wow.
3 month span. So I
Yeah.
went from, in that, I would say that first year of me practicing yoga, there were a series of life events that occurred that
Mhm.
really, I guess, maybe probably reinforced why I needed it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
because it wasn't something I considered. And even if I had, I certainly knew what it was. And to your point, you had certain misperceptions, right? Like, oh, it's this type of person that does
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I never saw myself as one of those people
Right. Yeah.
until, I started getting more involved. And, at the time that we moved, I found myself having a whole year off. And
Oh,
Mm.
nice.
so, and I told it's like I told my husband, I'm not going to be a housewife. I have to do something.
Yeah.
And so I had started, going to more studios and doing more classes. And then,
Mhm.
I saw this ad for a YTT 200 and I'm like, oh, what's that? And then I had to call the person. I'm like, but I don't really want to teach. Do you take people who don't want to teach? And,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
it's like, cause I tend to think sometimes, that it's like a fad, right? Like everybody's, a YTT 200 or everybody. And
Yeah.
that's not what I wanted for me. So
Mhm.
it was really more about how do I kind of, and that's it, it happened. It was more about how do I, better come to terms with me and accept myself because,
Mhm.
I was at this point where I was like, in the midst of marriage, parenting,
Mhm.
corporate job and specific like objectives and specific goals and I had to be here by a certain time and like these typical type of ladders that
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that you put yourself on. Nobody actually put you there, you put yourself there, right? Those were decisions I made. And that year of, I guess, reflection and I was lucky enough to, I always say to myself that I'm very lucky in the sense, right? You know, I moved halfway around the world. I have my kids, I have my husband, and we were able to travel to all these, really beautiful places that were around in that area.
Yeah.
And so I had the opportunity to go on different yoga retreats, and so it was a lot of, introspection that
Yeah.
year, where I said, okay, I want to learn more about this. And then I started, teaching
Mhm.
without the thought of, oh, I'm going to be a yoga teacher someday. It was
Right.
more like, oh, somebody would say, oh, you're a teacher. I can't go. Can you teach me this? And so I started doing like little private classes. And then, I decided, oh, I thought because I had started in prenatal, another ad came up for a prenatal yoga teacher training. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that would be great. It will help me for like future pregnancies. Sure. So I went and I did it. And, it was so lovely. Again, you meet so many great people, so many great teachers. And it's so funny. I didn't know it at the time, but when I was doing that prenatal yoga teacher training, I was pregnant with my third child.
Oh.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
nice.
And I didn't know it,
Yeah.
but I always, because I was more in tune to my body and understanding exactly what it could do. And I started also doing like some hypnobirthing classes and, more childbirth education classes. Again, it's not because I'm a first time mother or first time pregnancy. It's
Yeah.
it's just more like I guess over the course of the years, the older I get, I'm starting to realize I should treat myself better.
Yeah.
Versus trying to be everything for everyone, right? You're trying to be like the superhero or the Wonder Woman or the whatever it
Mhm.
is,
Yeah.
whatever these labels are.
Hustle
So
culture.
Yes, the
yes,
hustle
Yeah.
it
Oh.
is.
culture.
It
Mm.
is. It is. And so, you have to keep that balance. It's like a cliche, but you really, until you start to experience it. And I didn't want to acknowledge that all of that hustle culture was actually building up. It was building up for me. So by the time I had Sahar, my third, and I went back to work, it was actually, I probably wasn't ready. I probably, I didn't even think I was going to go back to work. I was in this
Mm,
lovely zone, but you get to this point where you're like, okay, well, I have to go back to work.
Mhm.
I,
right.
I can't not work, it's
Yeah.
the mentality was there. And, that really started to affect me mentally later on. And that's when it just got to the point where I said, it's between that and my kids. I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah.
Right.
wanting to be more there for them and to give them I didn't want my kids learning, that life is the way, okay, you have to go to college and you have to get a job and you have to do this and this. Don't get me
Mhm.
wrong. Those are all great things. I do not
Mhm,
regret my, secondary and tertiary educations. I love it. It helps me today. So
mhm.
it's definitely not a waste. But I think we are embedded, the way that our ancestors have sort of put this aura that this is
Mm.
the way that it's supposed to be. And the same thing with, this is how boys should be, this is how girls should be. And
Yeah.
there's only this binary.
Yeah.
Why is it
Yeah.
that way?
Mhm.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, right? And you can't really, it wouldn't change unless somebody takes the time and the courage to step up and try to make that change, and that's where, we come in, I feel.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was listening to this YouTube by Jake Blount, who is a banjo scholar on black string band music. And the reason it's called black string band music is that white people didn't want to allow it to be called bluegrass because that was a separate thing and they were in a separate basket. And so it's interesting again, like this kind of notion of what's allowed to be in what basket and what's allowed to be for what person. And you were saying like this kind of thing isn't for me. And you just had this lovely quote here in your bio that you like to use yoga as a doorway for discussions on race and other social inequities. And I thought that was really important to say, and I think it's really valuable because I think yoga is this thing that allows us to feel human and to treat other humans as beings,
Exactly.
and not as objects or difference or different things.
Absolutely. I think, when you grow up in a particular society, and if you're not educated in certain aspects of it, right? I'll use myself as an example. I, grew up in a country where race is just so intertwined that, it's not that it's not something that's discussed, but it's not the dominant aspect, and it does not distinguish opportunities and all of these other sort of determinants that affect us as much here in the US.
And
So
that's in
moving here
Trinidad,
to the
Tobago.
US, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so moving here to the US, it was very surprising for me. I remember working in my first hospital, and I would get these comments like, well, you're taking opportunities from us, things like that.
Oh, for fuck's
Or
sake.
I
Right
would
out
go
loud.
to
Jesus
go to
Christ.
the stores, and people would give you these comments here and there, and it's very surprising, right? Because if, to me, irrespective of your gender, your race, your religion, whatever, if you have done something, you've put in that work, then by all means, any sort of opportunities should be open to you. But
Yeah.
that's not the case, and that's not the case that I saw, as a young woman growing up. It's not the case that I saw working in the corporate world, irrespective of how high of a level that I got. In fact, the higher I got, it seemed like, and probably mostly males, but it seemed like people were more determined to show that, that they're that lack of acknowledgement, right? That it's, oh, well, it's because you're, Black that maybe you have
Yeah.
this opportunity, or it's because you are this, or it's because you're that. Why, right? And so for me, it's not about trying to be inside the crowd. I've never been that type of person. It's the same situation that I am now as an entrepreneur living in a mostly conservative area. For me, it's about, does this person treat me with respect? And so, do they treat my family with respect? Do they, how are they, it's not about what they think and trying to change their mindset. You cannot change people, right? It is more about, how can I educate them and inform them on the things that probably might affect me, might affect my husband, might affect my children, in a way that they do not feel completely put out by it, but also to acknowledge that, it shows that there is probably a slight discrimination towards me or towards my family.
Slight. Yeah.
So it's difficult. It is. I will not say that it isn't, but we, for all of the things that we discussed earlier, where you sort of use yoga as that coping mechanism, as you acknowledge the things that happen. Because if you really just, and it used to affect me a lot, I will not lie. When I was in that sort of corporate life, and it's like, oh, this is so fucking unfair. Why do I have
We
to
can
go
edit that
through
out.
all of this? And I would see, like, for all of the things and all of the projects and all of the accomplishments, and then somebody would just walk in, and they probably just picked up a piece of paper from the floor, and that was like brilliant.
Right.
And same thing, with opportunities in the business world. It's the same thing. You sit here, and I read and I look, and I'm thinking, okay, well, that's interesting. If you look at just typical numbers, and this, again, I come from a research background, so numbers, the evidence, I'm very evidence based in that sense. But when you look at the numbers, the number of minority owned businesses has actually declined, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And why is that? Like, people don't ask themselves the questions why. It's funny. And I remember watching a CBS News Money segment during the pandemic, and it was talking about, businesses, and they kept rehashing that, Black owned businesses are twice as likely to fail. And
Oh,
again, I
that's
sat
setting them
there.
up to fail as a mentality.
So
Right.
this is exactly what I'm saying. Like we
Yeah.
get so as a society, we get
Mhm.
these things thrown at us,
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
in any sense. This I'm using this as an example, but
Yeah.
anything, right? We get all of these,
Subconscious messaging or subtle
Yeah.
messaging that
exactly.
we accept to be true, whether it's
And
true
then
or
we think
not.
that
Yeah.
that's what it is. And I
Yeah.
remember feeling like that when I worked in the corporate world. I
Yeah.
remember when people be like, "Oh, Michelle, you're just so aggressive, and this is why, so we're not gonna,"
Oh,
and I'll be like, and I'll sit there and
the
I'll think, okay,
tone
well,
police now
I would
against, yeah.
rehash everything that I said. I would
Yeah.
rehash every email that I wrote, and you know, just for being direct or just for
Mhm.
speaking the truth. When
Mm-hmm.
somebody would do the exact same thing, and it's like, oh, these people are great. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, I can't tell you how many times I was called to HR for certain reasons. There are cases where people they were trying to fire me for things like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if it wasn't for, this is why I don't hash on it, because for every bad, there's always good, right? I
Mm-hmm.
feel like life is always balanced off, karma is existent.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I was in one of those situations, when I think back about it, there was always someone
Mm.
who can come in and speak the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And so I don't anymore, rehash and think of, okay, this is so unfair. And
Mm.
now it's more about what are we doing to ensure that other people don't feel that way?
Mm-hmm.
That's how I
Yeah.
feel now.
Yeah.
And so how can I, use yoga to do that? Well, first of all, I hope that other women can feel like me, as
Mhm.
empowered as I did when I was pregnant and I started practicing. And I
Mm-hmm.
would walk away every single time feeling a little bit better, a little bit more sure, a little bit more
Mm.
confident, a little bit more, relaxed. And guess what? My pregnancy was easier. By the time I got
Mm.
to my
Yeah.
third, it was like, I mean, my husband likes to say that he doesn't know what happened. Literally, I ended up with my third one. I didn't even know that I was having her. She just came.
She
She
just
just
slipped
came.
right out.
She slipped right out.
Oh dear.
And
Mm.
that goes
That
back
does
to
happen.
it goes back to your subconscious, right? Like what if you
Yeah.
are rehashing in your head over and over, oh my goodness, this is so painful. This is it.
Mhm.
Because that is how society
Right.
taught us, right? Look at every
Mhm.
movie that you
Mhm.
see in childbirth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every time I see one now that I am more sort of on the educator side of it, and I've done, a lot more research and just my own experiences, I sit here and I just look at these movies and I smile.
Oh, you do the same thing, Harmony. You get so
Yeah.
irritated by them.
So, same
Yeah.
thing. So, what do you
Yeah.
think our children are growing up with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
this is why I think it's important that we start to teach them these practices, because it's kind of like I mentioned when we had our discussion, with Yoga Gives Back
Mhm.
recently. What we do when we practice yoga is no different from being a normal, ordinary human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the Bible, if you look at the
Mhm.
Quran, if you look at all of the sort of religious books of and tools, and even
Mhm.
put the sutras, put the Bhagavad Gita, everything in
Mhm.
there,
Mhm.
it all says the same thing. Treat people with respect, be
Mm-hmm.
kind, be
Mhm.
loving,
Mm-hmm.
don't steal, don't
Mm-hmm.
kill, don't,
Yeah.
all of these, everything,
Yeah.
the overall philosophy is the same.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so if we think about the future, who are the
Mm.
people that are going to help with that?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Your
today's
children.
generation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
so
I
it's
try to say that
profound when you
to
really think
Harmony.
about it.
Totally.
I try to say that to Harmony all the time about our boys, that we're raising a man. We're not taking care of a child. Like, what kind of man do we want him to be?
Mhm.
And I want him to be more respectful to his mother.
Yes.
That's all.
Well, I mean, think about what's going on in the world today,
It's
right? And our
true.
rights, women's
Yeah.
rights.
I know.
You
Yeah.
know, it actually is incumbent on all the parents of males.
Yes.
Mhm.
Honestly,
Yeah.
to be
It
quite
is.
honest, they're the ones that are
Mhm.
probably going to have more of an impact
Mhm.
than, any other set of children, because if you look at all of the leaders, look at whether you're in corporate, government, anywhere.
Mm. Yeah, it takes a long time
The
to shift that, right? That
Mhm.
like that inherent internal bias that like we all kind of walk around with. And even in a yoga class, even as a yoga teacher, and maybe you've experienced this before too, but sometimes like I've taught with my partners who have been men, and a lot of times people like give them more sort of authority in a sense, right?
Mhm.
And it's just very interesting. You
Absolutely.
see it even in the yoga world too, that the teachers that sort of have really large followings and a lot of influence are often males, and usually white males.
Mhm.
Yes, and that's exactly it. How do we change that? Because
Mhm.
it's not that women or
Mhm.
BIPOC, you
Yeah.
know, persons are not there. They're
Mhm.
there.
Mhm.
But how do we amplify their voices
Yeah.
more?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so that the children see themselves in
Mhm.
every fashion that there is.
Yeah.
I think that having that as an opportunity to do that, I live in a mostly privileged area.
Mhm.
So my studio or my business is not, the overall mission is not to serve the the underserved population.
Right.
It is more to help the future generation. And how
Mhm.
can we educate them to different cultures other than what they know?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Because they're
love
not
that.
learning that in schools, right?
Yeah.
They learn that's part of life.
Mhm.
Now, I when I sit and I do homework with my kids, it's very different to the homework I had. We learned histories of the world. It was
Yeah.
a very different type of thinking. And so by the
Yeah.
time I moved to America, there were certain expectations that I had. And
Mm.
now it's trying to, how can I continue that with my kids, so
Right.
that they can then pass that on. I am from Trinidad. My husband's from Lebanon. We have to make sure that they
Mhm.
don't lose, even though they're American, that they
Mhm.
don't lose that part of them, so that they can then just share that out, because they're kids who they go to school with who never probably left the state,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
Yeah.
live in certain areas. Like going to Philadelphia is as far as some people might consider as, and I don't say this in a joking way. I say it in a way that, for all of the privilege that's
Mhm.
there,
Yeah.
it's not being used in a way that can really help the future generation
Mhm.
be more educated, and not by books or college, or but educated by life.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important to like that experiential education of, travel and experiencing other cultures and being in other cultures, and even like just living there for even a few months can really change a person and how they feel and how they relate to things. And I always loved India for those reasons too, is that it really like gives you such a rich experiential understanding of yoga,
Hmm.
because the there's so many opposites inherent within the culture that are just like there in front of you all the time, right? Like the most
Yes.
beautiful smell, and then like the most hideous smell. Like you turn one way, you turn the other way,
You have to
or
maintain your equanimity
yeah,
at all times,
you
and that's
know,
helpful.
like
Mm.
you know, very dire poverty, but then such like openness and beauty of the heart, and
But
the
it also
face
just
and the eyes, and all of this, all these paradoxes you come up against, and it makes you then um do that introspection that you're speaking about, where you're looking and deconstructing your own biases or your
Yeah.
own
Preferences. That's what I was going to say. I'm
preferences,
sorry.
yeah, or even your
Yes,
own understanding of the world, like of this and
exactly.
this or this, rather this and this, right? And
And that's exactly it.
yeah,
Why does it have to be an or? And you have
yeah,
to want to do that, right?
yeah,
And parents would have to want to do that. We're
yeah.
speaking, as if the kids have a choice, and they do, but for the most part, at up to a certain point, they really don't have that choice. The parents are making this choice for them. So it's how do we open the parents' minds as well,
Yeah.
Mhm.
from what they're embedded with.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing we've been trying to do is find common time with our child, and so we've ended up watching every single Marvel movie and TV show, including like 140 episodes of Agents of Shield,
Welcome
with
to
him.
the
Just
club.
Yeah,
and so just like
okay.
trying to find
We're in
time
good company.
together, and I just like we were just looking for how can we just sit in the same room together, and one thing I've been really kind of stunned and amazed by is like what a good job Marvel has done at platforming different voices and diverse images of what a superhero can be, and and how interesting also it is to see the vitriolic pushback in the culture war against difference. It's like, what do you mean there's a Muslim superhero? What do you mean that there's a female Hulk and or an Asian superhero? But I think it's just so important for
Or a black
children.
hobbit,
A,
or
bl- a black hobbit. Like, why
or a
can't there
black
be a black
mermaid,
or a
or
black elf?
Yeah.
No, and like black elves, like those are Nazi. Like elves are Nazis. We know that.
Elves are
And if you get a
Nazis.
black elf, then that's contradictory to what an elf.
Leave those poor elves alone.
Right, just leave the elves alone, man.
but
And
but if you think about why is there that
Yeah.
pushback?
Mhm.
Because that was how society
Mm.
formulated. They had their own predefinitions of what that would be. The
Yeah.
images that they are accustomed to and that they grew up with
Mhm.
Mhm.
are a particular way. It's
Mhm.
not to say that that was always the right way, but it just goes back to
Yeah.
who had the opportunities in the past to even entertain the thought of diversity
Right.
in, let's use entertainment as
Yeah,
the
yeah.
example, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to that, if you keep going back into the origins of it,
Mm.
that's what it was. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, women being able to wear pants,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
Yeah.
until, could you
The
imagine? Like,
1970s.
exactly. Like, it's
Yeah.
all of these different things because that's how we were
Mhm.
raised,
Mhm.
Yeah.
right? I mean, my
Mhm.
Yeah.
husband is Middle Eastern. Up until a certain point, my in-laws were really, I wouldn't say they were against, but they were very surprised that, well, what do you mean that you are going to work? And okay, that's
Right.
great. And
Oh,
but you're
for
taking
you.
care of the kids, right?
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
gonna still come home and cook dinner, right? And you're
These
still gonna
subtle
do.
microaggressions.
Yeah.
So, it took, I'm very fortunate that my husband did not have that thinking,
Yeah.
Mhm.
but it's a cultural shift, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
there's still some differences between us that we still don't agree on. There are things that his culture says that he is the,
Yeah.
dominant person, and there are days when I just kind of let him go with that. and then
Mhm.
I think
and then
that's
there are
the
days.
I think that's the story of every wife.
And then, behind the scenes, we'll just kind of do our own
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting. It's really, really interesting. I cannot tell you how many times since I've opened this business and we've gone to different places together, and people know the name YogaMazia. They, unless you really, I mean, one would think that if they know YogaMazia, they know that it's me, right?
Yeah.
But no, absolutely not. In my own community, my
Wow.
husband and I would go out, and people will be like, "Oh my goodness," and they'll be talking to my husband, about my business. Like, oh my goodness, you've done so well.
Whoops.
This is so great. Da, da, da. And my husband, I always say to him, I'm like, here's the opportunity where you can say and like put a foot in the ground and be like, okay, it's really my wife,
Yeah.
this woman of color,
Yeah.
doing what she can. But he stands there and he smiles. He thinks it's great. In
Yeah.
fact,
Oh, bless him.
He's
so,
He's gonna get it
I
at
know,
home,
I'm
though.
doing so much good work.
and I just kind of let it, slide. And because, for me, I guess, the good part of that is that the good that comes out of that is that at least they're saying something good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is how I've learned to cope with, these types of things, these are the smaller pieces. It's when, when you see the blatant lack of respect or, or if it's affecting my kids or my students or so, like that's a whole nother, ball game where I'm like, okay, that's different. But it goes back to what society allows, right?
Yeah. And what they anticipate, or exactly that, it's like that unconscious assumption that, oh, he must be in charge, or he must be the mind behind this, or whatever, right? That, I mean, you kind of have
And
to
that
like
goes back
uncover
to the
those.
support.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that lays the foundation.
Yeah, totally. What does Mazia mean?
YogaMazia actually does not have like,
doesn't have any.
It's funny. Everybody asks me this. It
Yeah.
doesn't have any particular meaning. We so I mentioned this, everything, all of this started because my kids pushed me to really go ahead and do it, right? I've been talking for years, when we moved to this area, I would always, like, we would be driving by somewhere and I would say to my husband, oh, that would be a nice place to have a yoga studio. And he'd be like, oh, okay. And I'll be like, oh, that's a nice place. That would be a really good space for a yoga studio. Yeah. Okay. And then when we finally got to that point, he kept going along with me, and I took him to the spot, and he was like, this place is so small. This is like, my husband's 6'4". So anything to him might be small.
Right. But that's a good measure, a really tall one and a little smaller one.
Walked into this unit and he could touch the ceiling of the space. Yeah. And we tried to come up with, I had, like, the minute I saw the space, I knew, like, it was kind of like this vision of, okay, I know exactly how it's going to break out. And so I'm like sitting with the kids, and they're like, I mean, literally, they would be in this room with me, putting flyers together, doing like all these things. They were like my little helpers everywhere, dropping all the flyers in mailboxes and doing all of these things. And when it was time to come up with a name, we were like, okay, we need a name. What's the name? None of us could come up with a name. I mean, we didn't even come up with a name for our cat. The name of our cat is Cat. Why? Because we all had different names, and none of us liked each other's names. And we eventually started calling the cat as an interim. And we kept it that way. And so I knew for a fact that we would never agree on what a name for the studio would have been. So I cut my losses immediately, and I said, you know what, I'm going to outsource it. So I put it into like this crowdfunding type website and said, hey, I'm opening a kids yoga studio. What would you call it? Like, what's fun? What's, and this, I kind of gave like the overall mission, and this is what we want. And so I got, like, within 24 hours, like, I don't know, 1,000 names came back.
Wow.
And we just kind of like boiled it down, and we ended up with like two kind of, really good ones. And I closed my eyes and I sent it to my parents. I sent it to like my my sisters, my siblings, my husband, of course, everybody at home. And I just said, well, we will have this be a democratic decision. And literally YogaMazia won by 1 vote. And there you go. There we have it.
But it doesn't mean anything. It's just like a fun name.
It's a fun name.
Sounds super fun.
It sounds super fun. I know.
It does, right?
Maybe you make up a meaning for it. Like, it means magic yoga.
It was I was not too much as concerned about the name and having a specific meaning for it as I was about the logo. The logo was that was definitely a little bit more reflective. The fox is a spirit animal that sort of represents neutrality. And so it was very important for me to not have like a boy or a girl or a particular race or a particular type of, you know,
Mm-hmm.
person represented in that sense. And so the fox was just very neutral for that, from
Wow.
all aspects. And
Yeah.
just if you think about the qualities of the fox, they're very compassionate, they're very playful, they're
Yeah.
very, quiet minded, they're very like focused sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, typical qualities of a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And because I really do believe in, in balancing our energies, which is what kids need, right? That's the whole point of teaching them yoga. you know we added the lotus around the fox so that it
Nice.
represented each petal represented the chakras.
Yeah.
And that pretty much, and the lotus obviously is purity and new
Mm-hmm.
beginnings, if you think about like babies, because we do prenatal. And so it
Nice.
was really just incorporating all of that and all of our values and everything we wanted to reflect in there. So so yeah, I guess maybe I didn't put as much thinking into the name as I did for the logo, but my kids were really like, they were really into everything with it. I mean, down to the class names. The names of my
Oh.
classes are after yoga poses, and my
Yeah.
daughter came up with that. And she was like,
Oh.
Oh.
"Mom, these are like reflective. Like we knew like these were the classes we wanted. I knew I wanted to kind of have them age appropriate, from prenatal all the way." And she always kept, when I did my prenatal yoga teacher training, I started learning about the goddesses and,
Mm-hmm.
took all these courses. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, and so she immediately was like, Mom, that's the first class. The first class, it's goddess, and that's it. And so we started writing. We were just like, okay, this is how. So it was literally sitting up late
Oh.
one night in this room, just
Yeah.
thinking about, okay, what poses would reflect, how these kids would be.
Yeah.
And
That's
That's
amazing. I
fantastic.
love it.
Such a
It's like a
family.
whole, yeah, so inclusive of everyone in your family, and everyone got like their own energy into it. It's beautiful.
absolutely,
Mm.
absolutely. Including
What
my
are
husband, the
some other
only
names of your classes? Yeah, your husband's like the head of it, so
Yes, that's what he
we'll
always
just
says.
leave
He's
him
like,
there.
I oversee. That's what
Yeah,
he says. So,
exactly.
so we have goddess,
Hmm.
and then when you move to, if we go from like prenatal, and then we go to the babies, well, that class is little lotus. So the
Oh,
lotus is meant to
yeah.
be reflective of you know coming to being,
Hmm.
and that light that's now coming on into the world.
Yeah.
And so little lotus and lotus are like our baby and toddler classes.
Yeah.
And then from there, we have the warrior one, warrior two, warrior three. Those
Nice.
are basically, your school age going into teens, because
Yeah.
these are the kids who really, they're starting to learn
Yeah.
how to be themselves now. They're starting to
Hmm.
learn resilience. They're starting
Hmm.
to learn that confidence. And so in each level, as they go through, it's per their age and how, the things that they would reflect in life.
Hmm.
The 6 to 8 year olds are very different from the tweens, and those are very different from the teens.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
more recently, we just opened a new class called Butterfly. And that class is for our students with additional needs, because we started
Hmm.
realizing that, um, initially everyone was sort of just by age. And then
Hmm.
we started seeing people, more students who had autism, or,
Hmm.
some sort of genetic disorder that might warrant for them to have a little bit more individualized attention, or to even, recognize that they're with children who are just like them, and to make them feel more
Mm.
inclusive.
Nice.
So we opened that class as well. And
Oh.
Beautiful.
so, and that's completely different, all of these. And of course, I have to have a family yoga class where I can drag my husband to
Yeah.
yoga every
Does he
time.
go? Does he? He
He
really
does. He
goes?
actually does. He does. Not to all of them, but I have to give it
Nice.
to him when I say, hey, don't forget it's Family Friday coming up. And he'd be like,
Hmm.
okay, and he'll come. So that's the
Nice.
name of that class is Family Friday, because for the
Oh.
most part I have it on a Friday.
Awesome.
And then we have like monthly kids parties. We just did one for Halloween last week.
Oh,
That was
fun.
pretty awesome. I had an artist come in, and she help the kids, paint these beautiful skulls,
Mm.
to reflect the Day of the Dead, and we kind of
Uh,
walk through. So we
yeah.
use these opportunities to teach the kids elements of, different cultures as well. And so we were
Yeah.
talking
Amazing.
about, Halloween is Halloween, but in other traditions, including my own, we reflect on the dead. We celebrate All Saints Day, All Souls Day, and the Day of the Dead is included within that. And the kids were really, they had such a great time. So it's not
Yeah.
just about come in here and let's learn some yoga poses. It's really more broad than that, right?
I
It's
love
because
that.
yoga is not just poses. It is
Mhm.
everything. And how can we use that? How can we use these breaths? How can we use the time to reflect within ourselves, just to sit? Because sometimes I have to tell you, I have kids who come in, they're being bullied. They have parents who are divorced. They have
Mhm.
parents who are, maybe they're living with a parent who has a disability. Maybe,
Yeah.
there's everybody goes through, and so they need their own time and they need their
Yeah.
own space. So, kudos to those parents who entrust their kids to, YogaMazia. I am
Yeah.
always in awe, and I'm grateful for that because, like I said earlier, it's the parents, right? It's the
Yeah.
parents who make these decisions. I don't go out there and go to kids and be like, all right, here you go, come to YogaMazia.
Here's some candy. Come to
Yeah.
yoga.
Yeah, it's,
Whenever
yes,
whenever I saw a kid that was struggling, I knew like there was the parents that were struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that
and so
really
this is
comes down
time for
to a
both of
social
them.
inequity issue. Like, why are the parents struggling? Well, there's all sorts of things that are caught up with that, with in terms of
Mhm.
the infrastructure of institutional racism, or the desire for a particular part of the population to keep the rest of the population impoverished, to destroy the middle class, to destroy the public education system. All these things are creating a very uncomfortable environment for our teachers teaching yogas in Title I schools. That's
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's exactly what we try to bring out to the community, because it's not just about having kids come to the studio.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to be able to afford that or even have
Yeah.
the opportunity to do that. So I try to make it flexible for for the families, because let's say someone wanted 5 kids to come practice yoga. Oh my goodness, am I going to take money for 5 kids? It's things like that.
Right.
So making
Yeah.
sure that I'm balancing that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then offering, all of these opportunities to the schools, the Title I
Yeah.
schools, as an example. I mean,
Yeah.
I live, like I said, in Bucks County, which is generally, there's some parts that are actually not as, you know, privileged as others. But if I just go across to, to New Jersey, there's some parts of other counties that are, where having students and girls see someone like me might be, because it's, I actually
So
did
helpful.
a check. So I went on to Yoga Alliance and I
Yeah.
typed in my area and I wanted to see how many persons of color
Yeah.
would come up.
Mm-hmm.
And now, granted, not all yoga teachers are registered on Yoga Alliance and put themselves in the directory. So this is, not by any means an accurate count.
Already
But
there's some self-selection of privilege going on.
That's true.
Yeah.
so there you go. And
Mm-hmm.
I counted, I think, maybe 5, including myself,
Mm-hmm.
out of like hundreds. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
I literally looked through all of the pages. I scrolled through and I
Mm-hmm.
scrolled
Wow.
through and I scrolled through and I scrolled through and I scrolled through. And now, when you think about that, that's just in my one area, because I didn't put a wide radius. I just put like, I was very specific. But if I even look through and I click on the profiles, not all of them, you know, own a studio, or they're,
Mm-hmm.
they're obviously affiliated with others. So again, going back to all of those statistics that I was talking about earlier, I certainly am grateful for the opportunity that I have to provide for my children and for others in the community. This is why, I think a lot of people, don't realize that as much as yoga makes this huge amount of money. I remember, was it Jean telling us the other day, Harmony, that it's like, I don't even want to know what that number is in the
Yeah, it
billions.
was like billions or
It's certainly
something. I don't
not,
know, 20 billion or something.
it's certainly not the reason that, I came into the business,
What? You're not making
or,
$20 billion
most
running a yoga
most
studio?
people are
Yeah.
making But unfortunately, there are people who are. And when you look at the people who are doing it, it's probably not somebody who's looking like me. Right. So,
Yeah.
when you think about that, it really gives you a point of reflection. And,
Yeah.
why are we doing what we're doing? That's what it goes back to, the why. And that's what keeps me going, really. Like, despite all of these sort of determining factors. At the end of the day, it shouldn't matter whether I'm a woman. It should not matter whether I am, an immigrant. It shouldn't matter whether, it's because, okay, this is the color of my skin. It should be about, okay, what are we trying to do here? And is it good? Is it good? If it's good, okay. Does it help the human race? Does it help us move forward?
Yeah.
And then we go from there. And I think, this is irrespective of whether it's kids or, pregnant persons, or this should be anywhere, right? You do it.
Yeah,
You
it's so
both do it.
necessary. It's so necessary what, like, the mission of your school and like your heart and educating children on all these different aspects, not just like on, whether it's Indian history or philosophy or, mythology, but like, because it is inclusive. And like you say, it is a part of all religions. I mean, yoga is the union of ourselves with ourselves and the union of ourselves with something greater, whether that's consciousness, whether that's other beings, whether it's feeling interconnected in a society, in a culture, in a country, in the whole world. And so I think that's like what people are missing, and especially kids these days. I think they're really missing that like connection and that interconnection and that feeling like part of a community in an integrated kind of way. Because like you say, at school, it doesn't always happen. And a lot of times, unless you do have a lot of privilege, it might not happen in other ways either, because kids are like at home on video games or, I mean, my son plays with his friends all the time on video games. And it's like,
that's a community.
I know it's a community, but it's
They're-
not like
they have their own
headsets.
community.
Yeah, it's
They're
not
on a Zoom call.
but it's like not embodied, and it's not like,
But
it's
that's just
different than being in
we're-
somebody's
we're-
presence.
We're doing the same thing
I
here with
it's
Michelle.
it is different than like being in other people's presence and feeling other people's energy, and like,
But that is why we send them to the parkour.
yeah, that's why we send them to the parkour. But
And it's
really
still a
important.
competitive environment, right? When you think about that. And that's what we have to try to reduce, to tell kids that it's okay to not be in a competitive environment.
Yes.
That, okay, we're just having a conversation. We're just playing this video game, and really doesn't matter if I win or lose, right? How many kids do you hear say that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I love like just like exposing them to other traditions and cultures, which, for us, my son goes to Catholic school, which I love.
And you married
Even though
a
I'm not
Jew,
Catholic.
which is great for Jed
Yeah.
to have all these different experiences.
But outside of that, but it's nice. I mean, in his Catholic school and in their tradition, they explore all different types of religions.
Yeah.
And it's,
that's
I think
wonderful.
It's really nice because they can talk about it. They have the freedom to talk about religion. So he did like a whole module in grade, I don't know, 3 or 4
on Libya.
But yeah, it's just nice to be able to, I think, be exposed to other cultures and religions.
Absolutely.
And understanding other, like you're saying, being educated about other parts of the world and history of other parts of the world, not just like your little,
and doing it in depth, not just because it's a check the box.
Yeah.
Right? Because that happens too, right? Where they'll say, okay, I remember one time my kids coming home, before the Martin Luther King holiday.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, what did you guys learn? And they were like, oh, and they gave me this coloring page. And that was it. That was the extent of the lesson. And I thought, and I actually had to write a note to the principal and, to just express my dismay and how I was so disappointed versus, other
And that's honestly all
holidays.
American kids learn about the Civil War in the whole of their 12-year education, because it's just too uncomfortable and complicated for these
Mhm.
these people to dig into, and they don't give kids credit enough to have difficult conversations. So
Exactly.
instead of having a conversation about trans issues, we're just going to shut the door on that, and that doesn't
You
exist.
say you can't. Exactly. It's always
Yeah.
a no. And again, it's going back to that binary. It's
Yes.
either this or this, as
Yeah.
opposed to, oh, let's just leave it open and see what questions come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which scares the shit out of most suburban people.
Oh, yeah. I'm reading this really great book. So as you can see, we do a lot of reading.
I know we're not in the library today. We're in a different area.
We haven't seen the other side as well. But so
What
my
book
husband's
do you-
reading this one. He's reading Obama's A Promised Land, the more recent one.
Nice.
But I'm reading this book by Frederick Joseph and his wife, Portia Joseph, Better Than We Found It.
Amazing.
And it really delves into exactly what you're saying, Russell, in the sense of, they don't want to have the conversations, right?
Yeah.
So if they don't want to have the conversations, how can we help them have those conversations? And so, you start to, there are things in here that I am even learning, on how and that's the thing. We're always learning, but because we want to learn, we are open to that. And that's the key. You have to be open to accept certain things.
Yeah.
And say, okay, this is the past. The past is the past. How can we change this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the very difficult thing about a society where one side is open to learning. It's be in a very binary. It's think very in a very binary way, and the other side seems pretty antagonistic to learning. And
But at the heart of it, people are people, right? And so I love what you're saying, Michelle, is like how to open the conversation, right? How to create that little bit of space that gets somebody thinking or questioning, or creates even just like a glimpse of an opportunity for them to think, I never thought about it that way. And that might be all that it takes, right? And if you have enough of those moments of like, I never thought about it that way, it starts to change how you're thinking about things.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be like a massive, like, you're never going to like just shift someone's consciousness or like perspective 180 usually. I mean, unless it's like maybe traumatic.
but maybe it does start with questions.
But like, I think asking
and that's exactly what it is. You just find that opportunity to just put it out there, right? And once it's there, it could be accepted. Or it can spur conversation, or maybe it might be, the person may not be open to hearing it, and that's it.
Yeah.
But you tried.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think as long as you bring it in a respectful, non-condescending way, then it, there's openness for discussion. But it's like you said, we can't change someone's thinking overnight.
And certainly not by raising your voice, but like that's
or just like trying to put your position forward as the right one. It doesn't do anything. It just creates that
tension.
Yeah, because
but we still do need to amplify.
100.
No pun intended. We still need to amplify those voices, right? Who may be underrepresented in those cases. If you look at the yoga world, there are so many great leaders. When I read about them and I tell myself, well, why are they not here? Why are they not here? And again, it's going back to that opportunity and that privilege. I have the opportunity to sit here and talk with you because I happen to be in the same, social connection through Yoga Gives Back. Thank goodness for that connection, right? I see names all the time and I read all, and I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, what, how is it that this person is not here? Or how come, I think if we just try to reach out, and that's very different, very different. I want to be very clear. It's very different from, saying that you're supporting and inspiring when the objective of that is really more towards augmenting your own platform. Because I see that a lot too. And so it takes a lot of reflection to sit back and think about, okay, what are the goals of this? Why do I want to do this? Why do you want to do this? Okay, we have a shared mission. We have a common voice in a particular way that we can do this. Yes, we're aligned. Let's go. I think if I cannot find those answers when I'm trying to contemplate something, it's very difficult for me to understand, okay, this is something that's good for this. Because I think you hear it all the time, right? Woman supporting woman. Well, to be quite honest, sometimes
not the case.
Not happening.
And this is why I go back to saying it's the future men of this world who can change this world. Because we do not even realize that, all of that change, when they see that come down from the top, then it starts to go from there. Unfortunately, and we see this in not just, the from a gender perspective, not just among women, but you see it in the Black community. I've had comments made to me about being, because I'm West Indian, I'm not truly African American. I'm not, there's all of these, you can segment as much and cut and slice and dice all around it. And so again, it goes back to, okay, what is that shared common mission? And then we go from there.
It's to explore our breath as beings.
Definitely.
And I just wanted to, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but you do have a book coming out that I wanted to ask you about.
Yes.
It's called We Rise in Power, Amplifying Women of Color and Her Voices for Change. And I just wondered if you could tell us and tell our listeners a bit about that project and how it came to be.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
Going
I'm so
on?
happy you brought that up. So this is a wonderful book collaboration led by Lola Small, who actually co-founded with her husband Black Lives Rising. And she and I got connected through, it's funny actually how we connected, through our interracial marriages. So she's married to someone from Barbados, which is in the West Indies, and I am also married to my husband. And so we actually connected through that. And later on, as we got to know each other, and she invited me to be on this collaboration to talk, it's really a book that will reflect the stories of all of these different women of color who were leaders in their own way, and, reflecting on, the challenges, the triumphs. It's really bringing together that collection of diverse women across, US and Canada, because she's actually based in Canada, and most of the authors actually are in Canada, who are advocating for social change and using whatever platform there is to bring that about in their arena. And so, of course, for me, it's through my yoga. But, what led me to that? What was my... So you want to know the story and the history, definitely get the book and you'll definitely know more. But, I think it's really a good opportunity to really talk about, the justices, what we need, equity, healing, connection, all of that coming together in one book. And it's really, really heartwarming to me because the book is actually going to be released on International Women's Day next year in 2023.
Oh, that's
nice.
great.
And a lot of my work for the last couple of years for Yoga Gives Back has always been during Women's History Month. And so being able to include that as part of my fundraising efforts, for me, all of the proceeds from this book will be donated to Yoga Gives Back. And so it will be included in a lot of my fundraising efforts as I start to plan for next year. And I'm really, really excited. So when we're going to have this really huge party, you guys will have to come. You're more than welcome to come join us. You can leave the cold.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Come to warmer weather.
Warm
It will be in
Pennsylvania.
March.
Warm Pennsylvania.
Warm
Tropical
Pennsylvania
for us. Oh.
And we're gonna have yoga, and we will be celebrating Holi, which is also at the same time.
Nice.
So we will have a big celebration as well. So it will be that month. Most of the activities will be within that first week or so in March, but the entire month will be a celebration of many different things. So I'm really excited and really happy to have that opportunity to help share and advocate. And that's really what it's about, really finding people who can advocate for those that come behind us.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I've got a lot more questions about Trinidad
and history. Russell always loves to talk about history.
I will love to have that conversation
we'll have
with
to have you back on the show.
Yeah, that would be great.
Again.
And
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Sure. Wouldn't it be good if you had me on the show in Trinidad?
Oh
yes, we should do a local.
We just said it again.
A
We're
local
going.
segment. That'd be great.
I'll start manifesting that one, and we'll make it happen. Absolutely,
that would be lovely. It'd be amazing.
My family is the doors are always open. My parents love when we bring guests, and it's literally. You will have a place to stay.
Amazing. A whole new family.
Oh yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate you offering me the opportunity to come and have this wonderful conversation. I really, really enjoyed it.
Well,
thank you.
We're just so grateful for your presence and
your time.
And tell everyone where they can find you.
So you can find us at www.yogamazia.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Michelle L. Khoury, and any other place that you see social media. Please find us, follow us, and give us a few shout outs, and come visit us too.
Yeah. Come down to warm Pennsylvania, sunny Pennsylvania.
Warm Pennsylvania.
Bucks County.
Well, Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love.
Yes.
So all love will be welcome.
Yes, I did.